Welcome. In this lecture, we are going to be learning how to apply forces to rigid bodies and also turn colliders into things called triggers, which allow us both to make this object act as a cannon, this particular cannon cylinder, and also create these trigger volumes inside our goal, our hoop that we will also be creating in this lecture, in order to detect scoring, like so. So when I hit play, we launch out of the cannon and we detect a goal scoring, and that is what is showing up here in our console. Exciting stuff. Let's dive right into that. So let's have a look at what we managed to achieve last time. So the ball here is rolling off the end of the cannon. Now that's all well and good, but we're going to want to make this cannon actually do something, and to do that we're going to need a concept called triggers. You have colliders, you also have triggers. Now the best way we can learn what a trigger is by putting in a goal into our world. So fortunately, a goal has already been created in our physics asset pack. So if we go into here and we look for our hoop, that is our goal. So I can drag this torus, as I've called it, into our world like so. And I'm just going to check that it's in the right place for the ball to go through it. So let's hit play. Okay, it needs to go down a little bit. And let's make sure. There we go. So it's starting to go through it. Oh, shouldn't do that while it's playing, otherwise it just resets. And there you go. The ball's going right through the center of the hoop. There we have it, and you can see the hoops mesh. Now you'll notice this is a bit of a complicated object. It's got a camera and lamp, and that's just because of the way it has been exported from Blender. Those of you on the Blender course will understand that. So we can drag just this torus out onto the root of the hierarchy. It says it will break the prefab, but we want to continue with that anyway, and destroy this torus parent, and just leave this torus mesh with the capital T. Now, if we hit play, everything should be the same because it was positioned well inside the child of the upper torus, the torus with the small t. Okay, so that's fine. However, it's not actually doing anything useful. So what I want to introduce is the concept of a trigger collider. And a trigger collider is simply a collider that doesn't prevent things from going through it. So let's create one. If we right-click on our torus, I want to create an empty child prefab. So I'm going to create empty. I'm going to call this the scoring trigger, because it's the trigger that's going to detect a score, basically. And we're going to need this goal scoring script. That's the one that's going to actually do something. Now, we're going to have to edit this script slightly. So let's go into the C#. And you guys will have done the programming by now. You'll be able to be a little bit familiar with what this stuff is. So here, down here, we have a method on trigger enter. When this is called, that's when basically another volume enters into our trigger volume. So we can print out from there saying goal scored. Now there's some other stuff this script does, but we will come into the proper workings of this script as and when we need to. But for now, we're just going to print out goal scored to the console. So remind you, the console is this tab, and that's where we'll see the text appear. We've gone over that in the past as well. Okay, so we have a scoring trigger, but no collider rather, or trigger component on there. So we need to go and add a collider. Now, if we type in collider, you'll notice there's this whole list of different types of collider. Some of them are 2D. We're not interested in 2D when we're working in a 3D scene. But we are interested in the mesh collider because what I want to do is none of these. I don't want a box. I don't want a capsule. I don't want a sphere as to be my collision volume. Obviously, let's have a look. If I added in a sphere, what would that look like? Apart from the fact it's too big, I can decrease the size. I can go down, right down. But it's just the wrong shape. So the real shape that we want is this cylinder that is in the asset pack. And for that, we need to use a custom mesh. So I'm going to remove the sphere collider, click on the cog, hit remove component, then go to add component again and select the mesh collider. Okay, now the mesh collider, we need to drop on the cylinder onto this mesh component. Oh, but we need to expand this because this is again a Blender object, and some of this is not in fact our cylinder. This one here is our cylinder. So I'll select. So this one is the actual mesh component. I'm going to go to the scoring trigger again, select this mesh component, which is the rightmost one, and drag it onto the mesh. And there you go. Now you can see we have a collision mesh, which is somewhat more cylindrical, which is exactly what we want. Now, we are free to scale this as we want. So using the scale tool, I'm going to squash this down a little bit so that it's more in line with the hoop. And I'm going to expand it out a bit so that it occupies more of the hoop. But I don't want it to go to right to the edges, because otherwise things that are going to bounce out of the hoop will detect as scoring. So I'm going to squash it down a little bit more. And there you go. This is our scoring volume. So whenever a ball passes through this, the goal scoring script should get called and print something to the console. So let's hit play and see what happens. Okay, so the ball at the moment is just bouncing off that trigger volume. Now that is because we haven't told Unity that we want this to be a trigger. We've simply told it that it is a collider. And colliders by default will prevent objects from going through them. So what we need is this isTrigger property to be checked. However, in a mesh collider, this is only the case with mesh colliders, you need to have convex checked in order for trigger to be checked. Now, you don't have to worry too much about what convex means, but it's about the shape of these meshes. Basically, it means you can't have a hole in your mesh or a dip or a dimple in your mesh because it makes the maths much harder for Unity to do. So this is fine. This is convex. If you're interested in a more rigid definition of convex, you can Google it. It's very, very easy to find out about that sort of thing. But that's what you need to know for now. So let's hit play now. And you'll see the ball passes straight through. And if we look at our console, hurrah, goal has been scored. So that code has run in our goal scoring component. And so that's what we know, that's what a trigger does. It means that code is basically triggered or executed on trigger enter. And we can make it do things. So that is now what we want to do to make our cannon do something as well. So let's attempt this challenge to make the cannon a trigger. I'd like to follow the same process as the scoring area, though this time you probably just want to use its default collider and turn it into a trigger. And then I'd like you to add the cannon.cs script to it, because that has some behavior associated with that onTriggerEnter method. And can you figure out what the script is doing? Hint, you may want to try and read the code. Okay, so pause the video and have a go at this slightly tricky challenge. Okay, welcome back. We are going to dive right into that challenge. I'm going to hit stop playing so that we can actually see things. I'm going to go to the cylinder, which should have been renamed cannon. I'm not sure why I hadn't done that earlier, so let's do that and hit enter. Maybe I didn't hit enter last time. The torus, let's not call it a torus. Let's actually call it what it is. It's a goal or a hoop. I'm going to call it a goal. So now everything in our hierarchy is well named and we understand basically what we're trying to do. That's much, much better. Now let's hit play and check everything still works. It should do. I didn't really change anything. Excellent. That's all still working. Now I'll go onto my cannon and go to the capsule collider, and I want to set this to isTrigger. Now if I play, we'll notice that the ball just passes straight through, so that's a bit boring, not really what we want. Now if we go to project and we go back up to the physics asset package, I'm going to go into the cannon folder and select the cannon.cs script. You'll notice it doesn't have CS in this view, but if I select it, it says cannon.cs because that's the file name. And I'm going to drag that onto the cannon. I can either drag it onto the hierarchy or I can drag it into the inspector. And you'll notice we have this new cannon script. And it has a thrust property. Now we'll see why in a second when we hit play. Boom, there you go. It's thrusting the component out. Now, the problem is it's thrusting it down, but we won't worry about that just yet. What we will do, however, is move our goal out a little bit so that it will thrust into the goal. Vroom. Okay, not quite right. Vroom. No, still not quite right. Vroom. You bored of my sound effects yet? So we've got, yep, the goal being scored and the bit going through. So we can kind of get the idea of what this is doing, but if we look at our cannon script by opening it up in Visual Studio, I'm going to make a little bit of room for us. We've got this, again, this onTriggerEnter method, which is clearly being called when the ball enters the trigger. And then what it does is it gets other, which is the object that is coming into the trigger, and it gets its rigid body. So remember the rigid body, if we look at our projectile, is this property here that simulates physics. So it gets its simulating physics component, which has been named RB here, and then it adds a force to it, which is in the direction up. Now, what does up mean with a cylinder? Well, because we've rotated this, if I move this into local, you see that the y-axis is this green one. It's going down here, but y is usually the up axis in Unity, which means that when we say transform.up, we mean this y-axis. So that's all you have to understand about it. Don't worry too much about the details. But what it's saying is apply a force in this direction. And that is exactly what we're seeing. When the ball hits the cylinder, it's accelerated in this green arrow direction. So we could change that by rotating our cylinder a little bit. So let's rotate it upwards, like so. And I'm going to move the projectile as well to be above the tail of the barrel. Now if we hit play, there we go. We're kind of seeing it going right up. If I bring it closer to the barrel, then it won't have time to fall. There we go. It's really starting to just be boosted out of the top. Now if I select the cannon, go to the cannon script, and I can change this thrust value to add more force along the length of that barrel. So let's hit play. There we go. It's starting to really work much, much more like a cannon. That's enough for this lecture. When you feel comfortable with your capsule colliders and your static mesh colliders and the triggers, you can move on and attempt the quiz. See you in there.